guys, it's Kevin in my review for the final season of Vida, of course being Season 3. So what this season is essentially about is basically two different things. We focus still on Lynne and Emma, and they are really trying to make this new club, you know, this place that they've now made, this bar. And they're really trying to make this bar a real hotspot for Latinx culture, a real celebration of it all. They're really trying to do everything they can to try to cultivate it in the best way possible. However, we're also dealing with this new revelation in you know, the arrival of their father when they eventually learn the news and how they really process it. And especially when both of them clearly have very different reactions to it, kind of threatens to break their newfound bond, and that's really all I'm going to say. So, Vida Season 3, obviously, I was hyped for this season. If you guys see my reviews for Seasons 1 or 2, you know that I fucking love this show. Vida has absolutely been, I think, one of the best shows on TV. It's also been the most overlooked, I believe. I don't really see anyone talking about this show, which has astounded me, because I feel like these first two seasons have been some of the most consistent television that I have seen in a very long time. Both of them have done such a great job at putting the characters first, but also bringing them to a place that felt generally satisfying in both seasons. Season 2 had a lot more plot than Season 1, and yet it still felt just as, if not more, satisfying than Season 1 really was. And it left off in a place where I was really excited to see where the show was going to go. Season 2 kind of made me feel like the show was in its second phase, and that it had a few more seasons left. So, much to my chagrin, finding out that this was going to be the final season, yes, I did go in a little bit skeptical, because while I understand that, you know, and I'm a firm believer of ending something while it's still good, I wasn't sure if Vida was at the point where it really could wrap things up, and if it really could bring things to a very satisfying conclusion. But I had faith in Tanya, Saracho, and everyone else there, because, you know, this show has really just been giving me nothing but greatness up to this point, and so I was really excited for this season. And look, I will say this: Vida Season 3 still does a lot of things right. It still does, I think, a really good job of showing the sisterhood between these two characters and furthering a lot of characters forward. But as a final season, it is absolutely the weakest of the bunch, for sure. I think definitely it is not anywhere on the level of the first two seasons overall. There are definitely some things that do unfortunately bring this season down, but we're just getting to right now, starting off with the cast. And look, that has absolutely been one of the strengths of this show. There's a true all-star cast here in terms of everyone. I think everyone has just always been on their A-game, and that's still very much the case this season. Everyone is still doing a really great job. However, in a change of things, the standout of this season for me actually was Melissa Barrera, who I thought owned this entire season. She does such a great job at showing the Lynne that we know, but also showing how that Lynne has very much grown and progressed. This is a Lynne that is far more mature, far more self-reliant. She isn't really trying to depend on others. She wants to focus on Vida on her own. This is something that she has put her all into. Really the only thing she's put her all into, and so she's really doing everything she can to try to make it the best it can possibly be, and striving for an environment that people want to come to, an inclusive environment in that way, and I think she did a really great job, but also just really showing how far that character has come, and the way that she discovers certain things this season, but also how conflicted she is about certain things. I just thought Barrera just did such an excellent job here, and I've loved her in the other two seasons, but for me, she was the absolute star of this season for sure, especially in the 4th episode of this season. She really stands out, and it makes me very eager to see what she's going to do from here on out. I know she's been in other shows, but this is really the first thing I've really, you know, recognized her in, so I'm really excited to see her in, like, In the Heights and things like that, because I just think she's going to absolutely kill it, and I love what she did end up doing here. But don't think for a second that because Melissa Barrera is the big standout, that means that Mishel Prada's work gets undermined, because it very much does not. For the past 2 seasons, she has been, I think, given one of the best performances in anything right now. I have been so blown away by what she's doing. She's been so consistently great, and especially with how complex of a character that Emma is, she still does do a great job with that this season. She still has some really great work, so much great subtle acting too. What I love about Mishel Prada is that she's one of those actresses where she doesn't even need to say a line for me to be able to tell how she's feeling in that given moment. That's how masterful I think she really is at playing this character. And Emma definitely has probably some of the showiest moments that she ever has in this show. She definitely has some of the biggest moments, absolutely, and she definitely does do a really great job here for sure. And the chemistry between these two is still electric, especially because they are the closest they've ever been this season. This is really the first season where these two are in a place where they don't have that resentment against each other. They're actually starting off okay, and it's really refreshing to see these two depending on each other and showing that bond that they really do have. I just think both of them nailed that so well. You really do feel like they are sisters this season. There's so many great, authentic moments with them, and it is because of Barrera and Prada's chemistry that really sells it for sure. I thought they both were just absolutely on fire this season. As far as the rest of the cast goes, they also do some really great work. Although, that being said, the rest of the cast this season I don't think sticks out quite as much as they do in the first 2 because they don't have nearly as much to do. The season really is focused on the 2 sisters, but also Nico. And Roberta Colindrez I think still does do a really great job here. I loved her in season 2. I don't like her as much this season. I think she's really good for sure, and I did like what she was doing overall. But I will say there are certain choices that she made this season where it was generally hard to tell what they wanted me to feel when it comes to Nico's character. And I'll get more into it, the writing and things like that, but I do still think she does do a good job. She has a lot of actually really funny moments in the beginning half of the season, and it was really refreshing to see because Vida was never a show that I laughed a lot at because it is a very heavy show. So to actually see genuine moments of comedy and have some really good moments injected in there, that was something I appreciated quite a bit, and I think Colindrez did a really good job with delivering that for sure. As always, sir, however you pronounce their last name, I always butcher it. They still do a great job this season. I really loved what they ended up doing here. They're not in this season as much as seasons 1 or 2, but for what they have, they're definitely really good. Same with Carlos Miranda, who plays Johnny, and Chelsea Rendon as well as Madi is also really great. Everyone really does do a great job this season. I can't really think of a dud in terms of casting, and that's always been the case when it comes to Vida. I feel like this is just one of those shows that has always had such a strong ensemble, and that is definitely still the case this season. That definitely still very much falls in line with how the rest of the show has been. So now we're going to get to the directing and the writing, which this is where we get to the things where I think I'm a bit conflicted when it comes to this season. Now, I will say this, though. Any complaints that I have with this season is not really Tanya Saracho's fault, because I really do feel like she was given an impossible task here. It is clear to me that throughout this show, you know, there was a lot that she wanted to accomplish, and I do think there is a lot that she does really well here. When she's focusing on quieter moments between the sisters, and you're really seeing that bond, but also how they're moving in different directions as characters, that's something she's always done well, and she continues to do that really well here. I think that the authenticity of the show is still very much felt in this season, and I think she definitely did sell that quite well. There's a lot of great dramatic moments here that definitely do feel earned, and I think her directing this season is as good as it really could be. You know, it definitely... There are some things that I wish she could have fleshed out a bit more, but I do think overall she does do a really good job when it comes to this season. And same with the writing. I think the writing for the most part is really good here. There's a lot of things they do really well. Easily my favorite aspect of this season, though, is pretty much anything that's going on with Lynne. I think Lynne as a character, not only is Melissa Barrera the star of this season, I think this is 100% Lynne's season. I mean, there is just such a great transformation that Lynne goes through as a character. To see where she was in season 1, someone that was so spoiled and really just relied on others and really could never admit that she was in the wrong for something and was just constantly getting her and her sister into all these situations. To see it almost reverse this season is really interesting. Lynne is now the more responsible one, while Emma is doing things that are a little bit more reckless in that way. And so I like seeing it switched around because it really shows how far Lynne has come as a character. This season, like I said, she is fully focused on making this bar the best that it possibly can be, really expanding Vida into something special, making it what their mom would have wanted it to be. And I think that's just a really great storyline for her, and I think they definitely do a really solid job with that overall, and I definitely liked what they ended up doing there. And the central conflict of this season regarding their father, I think is also very well explored, because both of them have very different reactions to this situation without really spoiling anything. And seeing them start out this season in a generally really good place and seeing how this is the one thing that kind of threatens to divide them a bit and start to almost pit them against each other is really interesting to watch, because you get where Lynne is coming from, but then you also get where Emma's coming from, and you don't really know whose side you're on throughout the season. And I thought that was a really good idea. Because there is so little we know about their father. We thought he was dead all this time, and so the fact that he's now resurfaced and the both of them don't really know how to go about this, equally, I thought was definitely a really interesting idea, and I think it was something that was very well explored throughout the season. I really liked where they end up taking that storyline. I don't really have any complaints there at all. There's also just a lot of things this season that are very satisfying, I think, especially when it comes to the characters of Maddie and Eddie and Johnny. I think they wrap those things up really well this season. I was very impressed by how the writing was done when it comes to these characters, who, I will say right now, do not have nearly as much to do this season as they did in the first two, but I do still think they gave them enough. They gave us just enough for us to feel satisfied with them, and I think that definitely was really well handled for sure. Getting into the things that didn't work for me this season is that while I think there's a lot of things that the show does do really well, it is very clear to me this season that this is a show that simply was just not ready to end. And look, I want to reiterate, I am not blaming this at all on Tanya Saracho, because I really do feel she was put in an impossible position. I really do feel that Saracho, if she could, would have had this show gone a lot farther. I think there was at least 3 more seasons this show could have had. I really do feel that way. In counting this season, I think there should have been 3 seasons. I think, 5 seasons probably would have been enough. And I really do feel like there was more story that needed to be told. And it's entirely Star's fault, because from what I understand, the season was supposed to be 10 episodes and then got shortened to 6. And while the first 2 seasons I pretty much thought were perfectly paced, this season and really, there was so much I adored about those first 2 seasons, and a lot of that was actually reliant on the pacing. I thought the first season, the pacing was perfect, even though it was only 6 episodes. They had just enough story in there. Nothing felt rushed. Everything felt earned. And same with season 2, because they had more episodes, it really felt like, everything was building to this point. Nothing felt jarring in that way. That's not really the case with this season, which again is weird, because I had very little complaints with the first 2. I thought those first 2 seasons were nearly perfect, and so you can imagine that this season is slightly disappointing for me. Now, don't think that that means that I don't like this season, because I do, but I'm not gonna lie when I say But I would be lying to myself if I said that everything that happened this season I was very much satisfied with, because that's simply not the case. Regarding their father especially, while I like the way they introduced him, he really doesn't feel like a character this season. He feels more like a plot device that is thrown in a way to divide the sisters and to put them at odds with each other. And while I understand why they did that, because it was definitely necessary, I just didn't feel it was done in a satisfying way. I feel like if we had a few more seasons, we really could have gotten to know this character more, really given him time to grow, flesh out his relationship with Lynne, which is very important this season, and then contrast that with how Emma views him. And I really do feel like this character could have become something really special, but because he's introduced so late into the show, he really doesn't give that much of an impact. He does in terms of the story, but in terms of a character, there's just not a lot we know about him. A lot of it is told in exposition dumps, and again, it's 100% because they needed to. They had to rush this season because Starz forced them to rush this season, and so things like that I don't think are as nearly well handled as they could have. Same goes with Lynne's relationship with the character of Rudy. I didn't really like this guy in Season 2. You're not supposed to like this guy at all, that is the case. However, that relationship is also, I think, very much rushed this season. What they end up doing with him, after a while, starts to feel a bit repetitive in terms of the relationship between him and Lynne, and it's kind of, it feels like they didn't give it enough time to really explore that relationship as I think they really need to, especially when it comes to the way they wrap things up with that particular storyline. Just wasn't that satisfying to me. I get what they were doing, definitely, but it didn't feel earned because it didn't feel like, you know, the characters were at that point yet, and I feel like that definitely did ruin some things for me. So again, there are definitely some plot points here that do feel very much rushed. However, that's not actually my main issue with this season. While I do think that's the main issue, my biggest issue with this season is something that I never thought I would say, and that's actually what they decided to do with the character of Emma. Now, everything going on with her and Lynne is pretty much perfect. It's a really good story with her being on the opposite side of the spectrum, where Lynne is more accepting of their father. Emma is a bit more dismissive. She really doesn't want much to do with him at all. And that made sense for that character, considering the relationships that these two have had. It definitely made sense, you know, why they would be on opposite sides. You know, everything going on with those two definitely made sense. What didn't make sense to me is everything going on with Emma and Nico. Because the way they start things out with them this season, and especially the way Season 2 left off, they were in a generally really good place. Emma finally felt like she had found someone that generally cared about her, that wasn't toxic, someone that wanted to be with her, someone that allowed her to be her, and I was really for this relationship. I loved seeing Emma in a good place because we so rarely got to see that in the first two seasons, and I was really hoping this season that those two could be generally happy. And for a better part of the season, it seems like the show has no idea what the hell they want to do with them. There's this weird tension with them throughout this season. I don't want to spoil what happens, but something comes up, and after that, the two of them are just in this really weird spot where you're not really sure how you're supposed to feel about them. And even at the end of this show, I don't really know how I'm supposed to feel about Emma and Nico. I feel like they kind of ruined that relationship this season, which sucks for me because that was one of my biggest positives of Season 2, is how great this Nico character was, how well she fit into the narrative. I don't think that was the case this season at all. I do not think they did a good job with this relationship because it quite literally feels like they are giving them like 2 seasons worth of story within a 6-episode season, and it just did not really work at all. So I do think that does very much bring this season down for me. Again, the actors are still really good. They both do a really good job. The problem is just it feels like they don't know what they want to do with them, and that after a while causes a lot of the story with them to feel kind of muddied and not as well fleshed out as they could have. So again, there's a lot of things writing-wise the show is doing really well. There's a lot of things that do feel satisfied. It's just, a lot of it does feel like it's on speed. It doesn't feel like it's as organic as it should be, like the first 2 seasons. It feels like they're kind of always moving in that way, and I do feel it is a detriment to this season at points. In terms of cinematography, though, there's definitely a lot of stuff that the show does do really well. I think the look and feel of it is really good, especially when it comes to the bar. The bar is far more lively this season. You get to see a lot more of the patrons of the bar, you know, what they're really trying to do there. It really kind of feels like its own character, and considering so much of the show has been about, you know, enjoying life and, you know, going through life with a very positive attitude, I think that really did it. They really did a good job of representing this season. I really like getting to see the bar, you know, not be completely vacated, because we haven't really seen that yet. We saw it in the finale, but this season we get to see the bar really as its own place. Honestly, it kind of feels like its own character at points, and I thought that was definitely really well done. And again, the way they represent Latinx culture on this show, they've always done a great job with it, and that's still very much the case here. There's a lot of great shots, you know, when it comes to landscapes and things like that, but even, you know, some of the choices that they make this season were really impressive. There was this lawn take shot that they did with Emma that I thought was honestly kind of astounding, and I really love the way that was handled this season. There's a lot of things that I feel like a regular show would kind of cut to, but this show tends to linger on certain scenes, and it just makes it all the more effective, and I think that's a technique that they've always done well when it comes to the show in terms of cinematography. The score here is also really good as well. I always do really enjoy the score of the show, and the editing, like I said, this season is not nearly as well-paced as it could have been. I think there's about 2 or 3 episodes that are generally really well-paced, but there are quite a few in the middle that I think aren't as well-paced as they could have been, because it feels like they're rushing through things, and I feel like that definitely does hold this season back a bit. I feel like the first 2 seasons, again, didn't have an issue with this, because it felt like they did everything they needed to do. Again, not really the case this season, and that was, again, very disappointing to see at many points throughout the show. Not always, but there were quite a few points where I just did not feel was as well-paced as it could have been. And perhaps if this season was 10 episodes, or maybe even 13 episodes, maybe I could have actually felt, you know, that they told they were at a point where they needed to end. But 6 episodes just really isn't enough. There's only so much you can do in 6 episodes. And though the first season did a lot in 6 episodes, again, the first season didn't have to wrap up a show in 6 episodes, which I feel is a much harder task. I feel like for a final season, you really need as many episodes as you can possibly get, because you need it to flesh out your story to its true potential, especially for a show like this, which is, you know, usually a half an hour. There's quite a few episodes this season that actually are longer than a half an hour, and I appreciated that, but again, they still just didn't feel as fleshed out as they could have been, and I feel like if they had more episodes and more seasons, then you could have brought some things to a more satisfying conclusion in that way. Alright, so with all that out of the way, now we are going to get into spoilers, because there really is a lot to talk about this season. There's so much that's going on here, so we're just going to get right into it. So, I'm going to talk about the stuff that I thought the show did a really good job with first, because, again, I have a lot of positives and a lot of negatives when it comes to this season. Well, not a lot of negatives, but more negatives than I have in previous seasons of the show, for sure. So, I guess I'll just get into it right now. The thing that, like I said, I think the show did a really great job with is Lynne's transformation. Seeing her this season and her, you know, trying to open that bar, again, is really well done. You know, how in control she is of things. That's something I really did enjoy seeing. But I also like that she kind of takes this time, you know, to be responsible and starts to kind of, you know, do some self-reflecting. Starts to realize some things about herself. And her realization, for example, like when her ex came back into her life and she really wanted nothing to do with him, the two of them just didn't see eye to eye anymore, was a really good way of showing just how much Lynne has progressed as a character. She's no longer this spoiled, sort of entitled, sort of, rich girl that she was in the beginning of the show. She's way more self-assured, she's way more independent, and I think the show did a really good job with that overall. And the way that episode ends with her having that sort of realization that everything that she has isn't what she really wants, and that she is kind of, in her current relationship with Rudy, she's kind of doing the same thing, where she is allowing herself to be in this relationship that she clearly doesn't want, and it's, stressing her out and things like that. I thought was a really good revelation for her character, a really good moment for her, and I really don't have too many complaints on the Lynne side of things at all. I think they mostly did a really good job with this character throughout the season, and it's moments like this that really show why. Again, my issue with it is just really the Victor of it all. Throughout the entire show, he just didn't feel like a real character. We know that he's religious, very deeply Christian in that way, and we also know that he tries to kind of peddle this narrative that their mother was not a good person, that, she specifically left him out, left him in the dust, and while Lynne feels pity for him, Emma is a little bit more skeptical in that way. She doesn't believe what Victor is selling, and though I do think towards the end they did come to a, storyline for him, he's still not really a character. He's just someone that Lynne kind of goes to this season. I think that wasn't really the best way that I think they could have handled it. I really do feel like there was some untapped potential with this character. And again, it's not Tanya Saracho's fault. It really is just they were not given the proper time to flesh him out, and I just don't think they did a very good job with that. I think they really could have handled that a lot better for sure. And then, like I said, everything going on with Emma and Nico as well was just very confusing to me this season, because on one hand, they start off and they're in this really good place, and then all of a sudden we hear that, oh, well, Nico's wife, she's still married to. The two never actually separated, and there's a lot of things that she left out with Emma, and maybe she still has feelings for her wife, and maybe she doesn't actually want to be with Emma, and so it's like you just gave us a whole season of these two getting to know each other, finding this genuine bond, making it seem like Nico actually cared about her, and then all of a sudden that doesn't really seem to be the case. And so throughout the rest of the show, it's just awkward between the two of them. The scene where Emma is, high off those drugs, and she's practically, forcefully, raping Nico. Well, not necessarily raping Nico, but she, she's like giving her oral sex and things like that, was a really weird scene. That was the one scene where I generally had no idea how I was supposed to feel about it, and I think they really could have handled that a lot better. And again, it's another one of those things where they were just not given enough time. I think they should have had more time to see these two in a good place, so when these revelations come out, it's generally crushing, because I really didn't feel all that much. I kept being confused whether they were broken up or not, whether we were supposed to be rooting for these two. I had a really hard time figuring that out, and I don't think anything they did with them this season was really all that earned. I just don't think they did a very good job with that story at all. I forgot to bring this up too, but in regards to other things that just didn't work with Emma, the weird, pregnancy storyline that they took her in, where she was pregnant with, that guy that she had sex with last season, and then she just, quickly aborts it. It's just another one of those things where it's what was the point of this? Why do we need to cover this? She doesn't really grow as a character from it, and it just felt like a weird direction to take her character. And it's another one of those things where I feel like if they had more time, they really could have explored it it well. But because of the fact that the season was so abbreviated in the way it was, it just didn't really feel like we had really any time to process it. And it ended right before we could fully process what really happened. It's just another example of just another plot thread that I just feel would have been benefited more if we had more time to really focus on it. Another element that I just feel was not that well dived into were things like the protest groups that Madi is in. Season 2 leaves off on this big cliffhanger that they're now going to be divided, they're going to be coming after the sisters, and for a while they're playing a big role, and we're seeing how they're getting very aggressive in that way, overly aggressive, to the point where they're really starting to act out, and we see how Madi is becoming uncomfortable with this. But again, similar to Victor, they don't feel like they are as prominent as they should be. It feels like they're in the background, if anything. I did like that Emma, you know, finally tells them, like, why are you guys protesting this bar? You should be protesting the building that is blatant gentrification. You know, it's this, you know, it's this place that they used to all be in, but now it's being replaced by something, it's being Americanized, and I liked that Emma called them out on that. I thought that was a really good move. It's just, I really was thinking that the rest of this show was going to be a full-on war between the sisters and these protesters, and that's not really what it was, and that, you know, Madi is kind of conflicted with that. That's not really what we get this season. It felt relatively quick that Madi was kind of done with them. And it was definitely satisfying when Madi decided to leave them and go out on her own. Definitely was a satisfying move. But again, it feels like something that we should have seen more of, and I think there was just, they really could have done that a little bit better than they did. I think they really could have handled that storyline better. So again, there's quite a few things that I just don't think were as well fleshed out as they could have been. Other storylines, like what we get with Eddie and her not really having much of a storyline this season. It feels kind of hard to tell where they're going with her for a while. I thought it was going to lead to Emma basically telling, you know, Eddie that that her wife wasn't a good person and things like that, but I liked where they end up going with her in the end of it all. But for a while, Eddie is really not that big a part of this show, and I feel that definitely did, you know, kind of hold things back a bit. That being said, a lot of the issues I did have with this season, I think are pretty much fixed in the finale, because while this season is very much not perfect, the finale, I think, ended on the best possible note that it could. There are still some things that aren't quite as satisfying, but I will say there was a lot of stuff that I really did enjoy. The whole thing going on with Victor and us realizing his true intent, that he actually was that toxic, and that he went away for a reason, and that he is completely against Emma's sexuality. He wants to bring down Vida because of all of the, you know, LGBTQ plus stuff that's going on there. He's very repulsed by it, and that he wanted to bring it down. Okay, that makes sense. That's a good conclusion for that character, but still, he just feels like a formidable threat. He doesn't feel like a character, and so I don't really think that changes it that much. But I'm glad that they did give him something, that they made it feel worthwhile. And I like that this really is the thing that really makes us question, are Lynne and Emma going to be able to see eye to eye on this? Because while Lynne is kind of at a point where she doesn't know, you know, she wants to continue, you know, what they're doing. She wants to fight. Emma is at a point where she doesn't really know what she wants to do. You know, they're kind of conflicted with how they're going to really go about this. You know, Emma kind of just wants to let it happen because she doesn't think that they can generally win here. And I thought that that was a really interesting idea for both of these characters. I like that they took them in that direction overall. And I like that, you know, the thing that makes Lynne realize that you know, Emma's the person that she needs to depend upon, and the thing that gets Emma to finally realize, you know, that Lynne is someone that though that relationship is pretty much, you know, the most important thing she has, is when we actually find out that huge revelation that all this time, you know, when Emma was sent away, it wasn't because of her sexuality, it was the opposite. It was that Vida was abused by Victor. Victor was abusing her because of Emma's sexuality, and Vida sent her away to protect her. I thought made perfect sense. It was a great revelation for that character, and it really makes us recontextualize the relationship that Emma had with Vida, because for a while, it seemed like those two had a pretty contentious relationship, but now it actually makes a lot of sense why those two didn't have as much of a relationship, because Vida also was gay, as we know, and Victor, of course, wasn't okay with that, and so it would make sense for those two to not have that relationship, because they couldn't, because Vida had to protect her daughter, and that's what mattered more to her, and I love that idea. I think that's a brilliant idea, and the way that Lynne gets Emma to, you know, realize what's really important, and the fact that they're going to have this bond, and that it's not going to be broken, I thought was a really satisfying move. And in terms of the way things ended, no, we don't know if they're actually going to be able to keep the bar. We don't know if Victor is going to get, you know, a good lawyer and actually win here. We don't know what's going to happen. But what matters is that we know that these two sisters are pretty much in for the thick of it. They're going to stick together. They're going to have this genuine bond, and it's very satisfying to see. And I think that they ended things there in a very, very satisfying place, and I was happy with the way things did wrap up there. Other storylines, so I really have no complaints on that side of things. I think that the Lynne and Emma stuff was very well wrapped up. Now, the other plot lines going on in this finale, I think we're also well done. You know, things that we get with, like, say, Mari starting her own, you know, starting her own group. Basically, finding a way to continue that activism, but not being part of such a toxic group like those protesters. I like that she's out on her own now, and that she's bigger than she's ever been before. It's a nice contrast to the Mari that we saw in the beginning of the show that wasn't as popular. And wasn't doing as much as she wanted to. Now she actually does have a legitimate voice. She's been bigger than she ever has, and I think that's a really great place to leave her, because at the end of the day, while she left this protest group, her activism is the thing that drives her character. That's the thing that she cares about the most. She tells Johnny that's never going to go away, and I generally do believe her, and I think it was definitely a really good place to take her into. I liked the way things went there. Same with Eddie. I like that Eddie's at a point this show where she wants to move on. She's kind of ready to move on, but then she realized at the last moment that she's not, because she's still very much in love with Vida. She hasn't lost that love for her at all, and I like that she confessed that to this woman, that it seemed like those two were going to be in a relationship, but I like that she kind of took a step back and realized, whoa, I'm actually not ready for this. I thought that was a really good moment for Eddie, and for me, made up for her really not being in this season that much. Like I said, Eddie just is not really a big part of this show anymore, and I was glad to see these last two episodes. They really did make up for that. That was definitely very satisfying for sure. Really good stuff going on there. I liked the way that all that stuff was handled. I think there was definitely a very satisfying place to take her in. The two things that I'm a bit divided on, and the things that I don't think were quite as satisfying, one of them is where they left off with Emma and Nico again. Even where they leave off with Emma and Nico at the end of things, I still just didn't feel that satisfied. I like that Nico is telling Emma that we don't have to put labels on anything, we don't have to commit to anything, you know, we're going to give it 2 weeks, we're going to see if it lasts, and that's all we really need to do. We don't need any more commitment than that. I think that's good for those characters. It's just, for me personally, they did so much with them this season in terms of the way that they were breaking them up, and then they were together, and then they had some sort of setback, and then they were together again, that I generally do not know how I'm supposed to feel about this. Am I supposed to be happy that Emma is still with Nico, or is this a toxic relationship that is only going to further her anxiety and these, you know, these panic attacks that she gets? Is this only going to make things worse for her? I really don't know. And again, I think it's one of those things where, you know, a lot of stuff is purposefully left ambiguous, but when it comes to Emma and Nico, their storyline was so confusing this season that even at the end of the show, I just don't really know how I'm supposed to feel about them, and that sucks, because I really do feel like they could have been, like, the big couple of the show that we root for, that we want to stay together, that we want to make it throughout all of this, because it you know, puts Emma in a good place, and really at this point, I just don't know. I really just don't know, because I'm still thinking about the scene where Nico was, you know, in the car making out with her wife, seeming like they're about to have sex. I'm not going to forget about that, and the show seems to want me to forget about that, and I'm not going to, because that was not really something that was talked about. That was not really something that Eddie ever seemed, you know, there wasn't really that conversation that they got to have. Yes, they moved past it, but not in the way that I feel like they should have. I just feel like there was way more room to grow when it comes to that story, and even at the end, I'm just not as satisfied as I could have been. The other thing, and you guys will be surprised that I'm a bit conflicted on this, we get to see Lynne and Johnny get together, and this is something I wanted. I wanted the show to end with them together because I feel like the show was definitely building to it, and I liked the way things were going up to that point, with Lynne rightfully calling out Rudy that they really never do anything that she wants. It's all just what he wants. I mean, even when they're doing all the weird sexual stuff, it's only because he suggested it. Anything weird that she wants to do, you know, like when she's trying to finger him or something like that, he's just not into it. He's not for that at all, because it's not what he wants. But then also there's his mother that's constantly watching them, and she feels like she's a burden to that relationship. So I like that she rightfully calls him out on that. Rudy was an incredibly toxic presence in her life, and I did feel satisfied. But for me personally, I feel like these two should have broken up way sooner than the finale, because this was not at all a healthy relationship. And I do like that Lynne comes to the conclusion that she kind of becomes something different throughout every relationship. She becomes what the guy in the relationship wants her to become. The reason she was more independent, more self-assured, more mature, is because that's what Rudy wanted her to be. She didn't really get to be herself in that way. And it still, I don't think, ruins her storyline this season, though. I just think that, again, there was more that needed to be done there, and just wasn't. And I think they could have done that better. But the scene with Lynne and Johnny, again, it does feel right. I like that Lynne is telling him that they're going to take things slow, that, you know, they're going to make sure that this isn't like it was before, where they're sneaking behind, you know, Carla's back. And I like that Johnny tells her that, like, Carla isn't even really in his life anymore. She's just kind of there for their child, and I think that that's a good move. The issue for me is that I just don't think there was enough between Lynne and Johnny for this moment to feel as satisfying as it should, at least in terms of this season. They had some nice moments when Johnny is reaching out to Lynne when his father has just died, and, you know, he's crying out to her that, you know, his father's never going to be able to meet his children, and he's devastated by that. Okay, that's a really effective scene. And there was that scene between them when she was at, you know, the party that, you know, that Rudy's mother was at, and then Johnny also happened to be there. Okay, that works, but this moment needed to feel a little bit more satisfying. And while it definitely felt like this is the right place for this to end, it didn't feel as satisfying because Johnny, again, similar to quite a few characters, was just not in this season as much as he should have been. I feel like we really should have spent time on the friendship between Lynne and Johnny. So them getting together just feels right. It feels like they were both in a place where they're ready to be here. But because Johnny is really only in... He's in this season. Again, he's in this season. He's in like 4 episodes. There's like 2 episodes he's not in. It just doesn't, and there are so few scenes he had with Lynne directly, it doesn't feel quite as satisfying as it should have been. So again, when it comes to the finale, there's a lot of things it did right. I think that overall, it definitely was very satisfying. I like the fact that it does end on an ambiguous note. I like that it's not quite as satisfying as we want it to be, because a lot of it's supposed to be left up in the air. But there are those few plot points that I feel like they could have fleshed out more. Things like, you know, again, Lynne and Johnny getting together. It feels right, but I needed more build-up to it, because there was build-up in Season 2, but not really this season. There wasn't a lot of build-up to it in this season, that is. You know, there's that moment where Lynne starts to do some self-reflecting on her relationships, but it's not really about Johnny. It's about other relationships that she was in, and so I think they could have handled that better. And then Emma and Nico as well, they really just needed more time to flesh that out. But things like what they did with Eddie and Madi definitely do feel like the right note to end things on. So again, the finale, I feel like they left things out on the right note. Again, I just wish that there were some things they could have fleshed out a bit more, but I do think the finale overall made up for some of the underwritten stuff this season. I think it overall did make up for that. So overall, guys, Vida Season 3 is mostly a really good season of television. It's not nearly as good as the first two due to the fact that it definitely does feel abbreviated. It definitely does feel rushed in quite a few areas, but the performances are still very strong. The relationship that the sisters have, I think, is really well done. The way it dives into certain aspects of things, I think, is really good. The examination it does of both of our two characters is really good. There definitely are quite a few things that are underwritten. There's definitely some storylines they could have dived more into. And I do feel that ultimately, at the end of the day, this show just was not really ready to end. I do think overall, because of how good those first two seasons were, there's a lot that it definitely does do right. I think especially the way it ends is satisfying. I think it ends on a note that people are going to feel okay with letting it end. But it is one of those shows where I am always going to kind of sit back and think, what else could have been done? What else could have been done if Saracho was given a bit more time? If she was given more time to tell the story that she wanted to, what else could she really have done? I'm gonna think about that. It doesn't take away from the fact that I did enjoy this season. It's just there are definitely quite a few things that could have been better. And I think maybe it's because those first two seasons were so nearly perfect that the fact that this one isn't nearly on that level is what is bothering me a bit. It's what's having me a little bit more, you know, it's what having me be a little bit more tempered when it comes to how I feel about this season. But at the end of the day, I definitely did enjoy this season. There's a lot of things it definitely does do right. I think especially for the character of Lynne, it is a really good season for her. The way it focuses on the relation between the two sisters, all that stuff is still really good. Vida is definitely still one of the best shows on TV. It just sucks that it's never going to be able to get that following that I feel it really did deserve. I feel like this really is a show that could have gone a lot farther if it would have been promoted more, if stars would have really done more, but unfortunately it just never really got that audience that I think it really needed, and it's unfortunate because, again, I do think that this was one of the best shows on TV, and I'm saddened to see it go. I think there's so much that it did when it comes to identity, when it talked about grief, when it talked about, you know, sisterhood, when it talked about, you know, certain anxieties and things like that. But above all, it was a show about celebrating life, and I think this season does do a really good job with that. I think that the main aspect of celebrating life, it very much does loom throughout a lot of this season. A lot of this season is focusing on just carefree events at the bar that they're doing, a party that's being thrown, or some sort of gathering, or, you know, something like that. I think was definitely well executed this season. It's just, at the end of the day, I really do wish we could have gotten more from the show. But I do think overall this is still a really good season of television. There's still a lot that it definitely does do right. So I am going to give Vida Season 3 overall a B. Again, I know that I was very back and forth when it comes to this season, but when those first two seasons are as good as they are, the fact that they didn't get the proper wrap-up, it definitely does annoy me a bit. I'm not gonna lie. But either way, guys, Vida is over, unfortunately. I want to thank you guys for those of you who have watched my reviews of all seasons of Vida. This has been one of my favorite shows to talk about. It's a show that I just wish got a lot more love than it did, but it really just didn't get that following that I think it truly did deserve. But either way, guys, let me know what you guys saw this final season. If you did watch it, love to hear your thoughts in. Are you satisfied by the way things wrapped up? You know, are there things you think they really could have done better? I would love to hear your thoughts on all of that. We'll see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.